Della Hartwell had caught 81 babies in 9 winters, and she had been paid in eggs for every one of them. Blue-speckled eggs. A willow basket of them, warm from under the hens, pressed into her hands at the door, while a new mother slept. Or a load of stove wood stacked by her step in the dark. A quarter of bacon wrapped in cloth. A jar of honey, once, from a man who had nothing else. She never asked for more. There was no more to ask for. In that hill country, in the year 1886, cash was a thing you saw twice a year and spent before the sun set on it. And the county knew it. They said it out loud, at Fuchs's store in Steiner Flat, where 40 folks could stand and hear. The granny woman works for eggs. That's the arrangement. They said it the way you'd say the creek runs downhill. A fact. A settled thing. 9 years she had ridden out before dawn, and 81 children walked that county now who would not be walking, would not be breathing, if not for her 2 hands. And still. Eggs. Then came the January the Krauss twins arrived crosswise. And the morning after, a rancher rode 40 miles to the county seat and signed half his breeding herd into her name. That's the part I want you to sit with. Half a herd. Into the name of a woman paid in eggs. But I'm not going to tell you yet what she did with that paper. Because what she did with it is the whole story. If you believe love is built with 2 pairs of hands, this story is for you. Before we go on, do this one thing for me. Subscribe, and in the comments, tell me the town you're watching from. I want to see how far a story about a woman paid in eggs can travel. Now, let's begin. The road out of Steiner Flat ran gray in the hour before the light came. Della was on it, the way she was on it most mornings, her mare picking a careful line through the frost. The willow basket hung empty on her arm. It always went out empty. It always came home full. That was the shape of her life, and she had made her peace with it a long time ago. She was 51. Widowed young, so long ago that the grief had gone smooth as a river stone. No children of her own that the county knew about, and the county thought it knew everything. Her hands were the hands of a woman who worked. Cracked at the knuckle in winter, strong in a way that had nothing to do with size. Those hands had turned babies in the dark by feel alone, when there was no doctor for 40 miles and no lamp worth the name. She had learned it all from Granny Ottilie Reinhardt, Ottilie, who caught 200 babies in her time and taught Della everything she knew about the terrible, holy business of the birthing bed. Ottilie, who died the winter Della turned 40. And here is the thing Della never said out loud, the thing that sat under her ribs like a cold coal. When they buried Granny Ottilie, they buried her in a borrowed dress. 200 babies. And the woman went into the ground in a dress that belonged to somebody else, because she owned nothing of her own worth burying her in. Della thought about that more than she let on. The mare knew the way better than Della did. Down the draw, up the far side, past the Vance place where a single lamp burned in the kitchen window. Gideon Vance was up. Gideon Vance was always up. A widower like her, land proud and quiet as a fence post, 54 years old, and carrying the Vance grass like it was the last thing on earth that would have him. They nodded to each other on the road, maybe 6 times a year. That was the whole of it. 2 people who had both learned to need nobody, passing on a gray road, each careful not to slow down. She had been offered things before, understand, that's what folks forget about Della Hartwell. She had been offered a milk cow once, by a family so grateful they'd have gone hungry to give it. She refused. Offered a good saddle. Refused. A widow up on the ridge tried to sign over a piece of bottom land, and Della talked her out of it, gentle but firm, and took a dozen eggs instead. Because here was her rule, and she held it like scripture. The day a granny woman takes something too big is the day she stops being free. Take a cow, and the next time that family's daughter labors hard, they'll watch your hands and wonder what you owe them back. Take land. And you're no longer the woman who comes for anybody. You're the woman who was bought. Eggs kept her free. Eggs asked nothing. Eggs let her ride to the poorest cabin in the county at midnight and the richest ranch by noon, and owe both the same, which was to say, nothing at all. She wanted to be counted. God, she wanted to be counted. But she would not be owned to do it. And in her mind, those two things could not sit at the same table. She was wrong about that. She just didn't know it yet. That morning she came home with the basket full. A berth up at the Schmidt place, an easy one, a fat boy who came bawling before she'd even got her coat off. Mrs. Schmidt pressed the eggs on her, and Della took them, and rode home in the new light with the basket warm against her side, and she was, in that plain and ordinary way, content. 81 children, never a mother lost. Not one. In 9 years she had never once had to ride away from a house where the sheet came up over a face. Whatever else the county paid her, that was the wage that mattered. It was 2 weeks later that the boy came on the mule. She heard him before she saw him. The mule was lathered white, run near to death, and the boy on its back was maybe 12 and gray in the face with fear. He hauled up in her yard and couldn't get the words out clean. They came in pieces. The Krauss place. Ms. Krauss. 2 days now. 2 days she's been at it, and the baby won't come, and Mr. Krauss sent me and the doctors 40 miles off, and the river's up. The river's up so he can't get across. And Mr. Krauss says please. He says please come. He says, get down off that mule before you kill it, Della said. Water it. You're staying here till it's fit to ride. And she was already moving, already inside, already pulling her satchel off the hook and the clean cloths and the length of good cord she kept boiled and dry for exactly this. 2 days. 2 days was bad. 2 days meant something was wrong that a mother's own body couldn't fix, and 40 miles of flooded river meant there was no doctor coming to fix it either. There was her. There was only ever her. She took the willow basket down out of habit and then set it back. Not this time. This time she wasn't going for eggs. The Krauss place sat out past the far draw, good grass. A solid house Emil Krauss had built board by board with his own hands. Della had heard of them the way you hear of anybody. German Anglo stock people, hard workers. Kept to themselves. Marta Krauss was young, and this was her first, and a first that runs 2 days is the kind that takes a mother and a child both, right down into the ground together, unless somebody's hands are quick and unafraid. She pushed the mare harder than she liked. It was full dark by the time the house came up out of the flat, every window burning, the yard full of the awful hush of a place waiting on death. Emil met her at the door. A big man gone small with fear, and he took her arm like a drowning man takes a rope, and he couldn't even speak, he just pointed. Della stepped inside, and she smelled it the second she crossed the threshold. Long labor. Fear sweat. The particular sourness of a body that has been fighting too long. Marta lay in the bed near gone, her lips cracked, her eyes rolling to find Della, and fixing on her with a look Della had seen too many times. The look that asks, without words, am I going to die? And behind Marta's terror there was something else, something Della clocked and set aside for later, an old woman sitting in the corner with a face like a fist. Marta's kin, she'd learn. But that was for later. Right now there was work. She got her hands washed. She got her sleeves back. She sent Emil out of the room, gentle, but with no room in it to argue, because a frightened husband is worse than useless at a hard bed. And then she did the thing that Granny Ottilie taught her, the first thing, the only thing. She put her 2 hands on Marta's belly, and she felt. And her stomach dropped. Because there wasn't one child in there. There were 2. And neither one of them was lying the way a child is meant to lie. They were crosswise. Both of them, turned sideways in a womb worn out from 2 days of pushing against a door that could not open. Della had turned a breech before. She had turned more than one. But 2 babies lying crosswise, in a mother this far gone, 40 miles from the nearest doctor and a river up between, there are midwives who caught babies for 30 years and never once faced that and prayed they never would. She faced it that night, alone, by the light of one good lamp and one guttering one. I'm not going to walk you through the hours the way they happened, because some things aren't for telling in full, and a woman's private battle for her own life is one of them. But I'll tell you, it took 11 hours. 11. From the dark of that night to the gray of the next morning, I'll tell you that Della Hartwell did not sit down once, and did not eat, and barely drank the water somebody set at her elbow. I'll tell you she talked to Marta the whole time in a low, steady voice, like a woman gentling a spooked horse, telling her to breathe, telling her to rest between, telling her lies about how well it was going when it was not going well at all. There was a length of clean cord. There were her 2 hands, working by feel in the dark places where eyes are no use. There was a moment, she never told anybody about this part, not for years. There was a moment near 4 in the morning when she felt the first child turn under her fingers, turn the way it had to turn, and she nearly wept from the plain animal relief of it. And then there was the second one to do all over again, with a mother who had nothing left. But by dawn there was a sound in that room that had not been there when Della walked in. 2 sounds, actually, thin and furious and alive. 2 babies crying, a boy and a girl, red and squalling and whole. And under them, quieter, the sound that mattered most to Della, the sound she had ridden all that way for. Marta Krauss, breathing, wrung out, gray, barely there. But breathing, her chest going up and down. Her eyes open, and finding her children and filling up. Never a mother lost. Not that night either. 82 children now, and both their mothers alive. Emil came to the door when he heard the crying. He stood there in the gray light, and he looked at his wife alive in the bed, and his 2 children in the crook of Della's arm, and this big land-proud man who had built his house board by board. He came apart. Just came apart standing up, the tears running into his beard, and he couldn't say a word. Not one. Della was past exhaustion, past the far side of it, into that strange clear country where you've worked so long you feel like glass. She handed him his son. She handed him his daughter. She started, out of pure habit, to gather her cloths. And Emil found his voice, and what he said was, "Name your price." 3 words, and Della felt them land wrong, the way you feel a step that isn't there in the dark, because it wasn't a question, the way he said it. It was a vow, a man promising his whole self. Name your price, and I will pay it if it takes everything I have. She should have seen the trouble coming right then. She was too tired to see it. She gave him the answer she gave everyone, the answer that had kept her free for 9 years. She said, "Same as always." And Emil Krauss looked at her, and then he looked, slowly, at the empty willow basket she hadn't even brought, at the satchel, at the plain gray dress of a woman who owned almost nothing. He was thinking of eggs. She watched him think it. She watched him do the arithmetic that she had spent her whole life refusing to do. His wife's life, his 2 children's lives, weighed on one side of the scale, and a basket of eggs on the other. And she saw something move in his face, something set, something that frightened her a great deal more than a hard birth ever had. She rode home that morning with an empty basket and a bad feeling. She told herself it was just the tiredness. She was wrong about that too. She slept the day away, and most of the night, the sleep of a woman who's given everything, and she woke thinking maybe she'd imagined the look on Emil's face. Maybe he'd send eggs, or a smoked ham, and it would be over, and she'd go back to being the granny woman who worked for whatever the country could spare. But Emil Krauss had not been thinking about eggs. Emil Krauss had been thinking about the 40 miles to Hertzberg and the flooded river and the 11 hours, and a debt that no honest man could carry and still sleep. While Della slept, Emil saddled up. He rode all the way to the county seat at Hertzberg, to the courthouse there, to the recorder's office with its ledgers and its dust and its official pen. And Emil Krauss, before a witness, put his hand to a paper and signed over 40 head of breeding stock. Half of everything he owned that mattered. Half the Krauss herd, the animals that were his family's whole future, signed them out of his own name and into the name of Della Hartwell. 40 head, into the name of a woman paid in eggs. The recorder must have looked at him twice. But Emil's hand didn't shake. To him it was simple. His wife was alive. His children were alive. A herd was just cattle, and cattle could be bought and sold and bred back up, and a life could not. In his mind the scale was still lopsided. 40 head was the most he could give, and it still wasn't enough, and he knew it wasn't enough, and he signed anyway, because it was what he had. The county herd by nightfall. Of course it did. A thing like that can't stay in a courthouse. It ran along the roads and the fence lines and through the back door of Fuchs's store faster than any horse. The granny woman. The one paid in eggs. Emil Krauss just signed her half his herd, 40 head, into her name. And here is where you'd think the story turns happy. Poor Midwife, rich at last, all her years of eggs paid back in one grand stroke. Justice, a gift the size of the debt. That is not what happened. Because you don't know Della Hartwell yet. She heard about it from a neighbor who came by grinning, tickled pink to be the one to tell her. And Della didn't grin back. Della went cold. She stood in her own doorway and felt the whole shape of her free life tilt under her feet, and the first clear thought in her head was not thank God. The first clear thought in her head was, I have to give it back. Because a herd is not eggs. A herd is not a load of stove wood. A herd is the kind of gift that changes what you are. She had spent 9 years being the woman who came for anybody, rich or poor, and owed them all the same nothing. And the second she took 40 head off Emil Krauss, that was over. She'd be the woman who got herself a herd. She'd be the woman who was bought. And the next time some poor family's girl labored 2 days crosswise, they'd watch her hands and wonder, in the back of their minds where a person can't help it, whether the granny woman was working as hard for eggs as she'd worked for cattle. She saddled the mare the next morning and rode to the Krauss place with her jaw set. Marta was still abed, mending slow, the twins asleep beside her. Emil came out to the yard, and when he saw Della's face, he already knew. But Della said it anyway, laid it out plain the way she laid everything out plain, because that was her way and always had been. Emil, I can't take the cattle, he started to argue. Started in about his wife, his children, the river, the 11 hours. Della held up her hand and stopped him. Listen to me, listen close, because I'm only saying it once. A woman who takes a herd for a life she saved is a woman who was bought. And a bought woman is no use at the next hardbed. She let that sit. You understand me? The day I take those 40 head is the day I stop being able to do the thing you're thanking me for. I ride to every cabin in this county at any hour God sends, and I ride there free, and free is the only way it works. Take your gratitude and make it that big, and you don't thank me. You end me. Emil's face worked. He was a proud man, and this was a proud gift, and she was handing it back to him. And it hurt him worse, she could see, than if she'd slapped him. And here Della told him the true thing, the thing under the rule. Because she was tired, and because he deserved the truth, she told him the part she'd never told anybody. You want to know something, Emil? Gratitude this big scares me worse than being poor ever did. I've been poor my whole life, and it never once frightened me. But this, she gestured at the barn, the pens, the cattle standing dumb in the morning light, this frightens me down to my boots. Because a woman who takes it is beholden. And a granny woman can't be beholden. Not to you, not to anybody. The minute I owe you, every mother in this county pays for it. Do you see? At every bedside from now on, they'll wonder what the granny woman's owed. And I won't have it. I have kept myself clean of that for 9 years, and I will not sell it for 40 head of your cattle, not even to thank you, not even because I love those 2 babies I pulled into the world with my own hands. Take it back. She meant it. Every word. And it was the truest thing she knew, and it was also, though she couldn't see it, the exact shape of the wall she'd built around her own life. Because she could not tell the difference, she had never been able to tell the difference between a gift that owns you and a partnership that sets you free. To Della, they were the same animal, and that blind spot was about to cost her, or save her, and for a long while she wouldn't be able to say which. Emil wouldn't take it back. That was the trouble. He was as stubborn as she was, and to him, unsigning the paper was unsaying the thank you. And he couldn't do it. He stood in his yard with his hat in his hands and he said, "It's done, Della. It's filed. It's in your name at Hertzberg, and I won't be the man that takes it back. You do with it what your conscience says. But I won't undo it. I can't." And he turned and went back in the house to his wife, and left her standing there in the yard, owning 40 head of cattle she did not want and could not refuse. She rode home slow that day, and the talk, which had started warm, began to turn. That's the other thing about a county that pays a woman in eggs. It doesn't much like to see her suddenly rich. At Fuchs's store, the tune changed inside a week. First it was, won't that be nice for her? Then it was, well, 40 head, that's a lot for catching a baby, ain't it? Then it was, the midwife got herself a herd, spoken with a little twist on the got herself. The twist that says she angled for it. She earned it some way that wasn't honest. A woman doesn't come by 40 head clean. The very thing Della had ridden out to prevent was happening anyway, and she hadn't even taken the cattle. Owning them on paper was enough. In their mouths, she was already bought. It ate at her. She lay awake with it. And somewhere in those sleepless nights, turning it over and over, Della started to see the outline of a different thing. Not a gift. She would not take a gift. A gift owns you. But what if it wasn't a gift? What if it was something she worked for? A share. Not 40 head handed to her like charity, but 40 head she ran, and worked, and took a cut of. A running share. Cattle she earned her part of every single day with her own 2 hands, the way she earned eggs. A thing a woman could hold with her head up. A thing she could pass down, someday to a daughter and say, I didn't get given this. I built it, buried in a borrowed dress. That's what she kept hearing, in Granny Ottilie's voice. 200 babies and a borrowed dress. And Della thought, not me. If she found the right shape for this, the shape that didn't own her, then maybe, a granny woman didn't have to go into the ground owning nothing after all. Maybe you could be counted and stay free both. Maybe those 2 things could sit at the same table. But cattle need grass. And Della Hartwell owned exactly the patch of ground her cabin stood on, and not 1 blade more. 40 head on paper, and nowhere on God's earth to put them. She thought about that for 3 days. And then she did the thing that turned a debt into a story. She got up before dawn, the way she always did, and she saddled the mare. But she didn't take the willow basket. She rode to Hertzberg instead, the whole long way to the county seat, and she walked into the recorder's office with her back straight, and she told the man behind the ledger that she would not take Emil Krauss's deed the way it was written. She'd take it converted, filed over, 40 head, held as her own separate property, and she made the man write that part careful, separate property, because a married woman's law and a single woman's law were different things in Texas in 1886, and Della had asked around and knew exactly what a woman could hold in her own name and no man could touch. 40 head, hers, separate, to be run on shares. 1 calf in 3, she'd work them, and take her third, and earn every hoof of it. The recorder wrote it all down. And when Della walked back out onto the courthouse steps at Herzberg, the paper folded in her satchel, she had done something no gift could ever have done for her. She had turned charity into a wage. She had made herself, on the county's own official ledger, not a woman who was bought, but a woman who owned her own work. There was just the one problem left. The same problem. Grass, 40 head, and no ground to run them on, and a share arrangement isn't worth the paper it's filed on if the cattle have nowhere to stand. There was exactly one man in that whole county with spare grass and no wife to raise an eyebrow at a business dealing with a widow, one man whose lamp she passed in the dark 6 mornings a year and never once slowed down for. One man as land proud and as alone and as stubborn about owing anybody anything as she was herself. Della turned the mare toward the far draw, toward the Vance place, and somewhere across that draw, Gideon Vance was standing in his own yard in the last of the light, looking out over good grass and a note he'd told no living soul about, a debt of his own coming due, and he had no earthly idea that the granny woman was riding his way with a proposition, or that the woman he'd nodded to on the road for 9 years was about to knock on his door and change the rest of both their lives. She reached the edge of the draw as the sun went down, and she stopped there a moment, the paper in her satchel, her heart going harder than a business call had any right to make it go, and she looked across at the Vance lamp coming up gold in the window. Then she started down. The Vance dogs came out to meet her, low and grumbling. And then they knew her and went quiet. Gideon stood in the doorway with the lamp behind him. He did not say welcome. He did not say anything. He just stepped back and held the door, the way a man does when he has decided to be surprised as little as possible. "Della Hartwell," he said finally. "Gideon, you lost?" No, he waited. That was his way. 9 years of the road between them, and she had never once heard him waste a word. So she didn't waste any either. She set the satchel on his table and drew out the folded paper and laid it flat where the lamp could reach it. "I've got 40 head of breeding stock," she said. "Filed in my name. Mine, separate, run on shares. 1 calf in 3 is mine to sell." She put one finger on the paper. "And no grass on God's earth to run them on." He looked at the paper a long time. He did not touch it. "Krauss cattle," he said. "My cattle. It says so right there. The county says Krauss gave them to you. The county says a lot of things." She lifted her chin. "I didn't take a gift, Gideon. I don't take gifts. I took a job. There's a difference, and it's written down." He crossed the kitchen and poured coffee without asking. He set a cup in front of her. Black, he didn't know yet that she took it black, but he'd guessed right, and she noticed that he'd guessed. "You want my grass," he said. "I want to rent your grass. Or share it, whatever a fair man calls fair." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "You've got the best draw in the county and half of it standing empty. I've got 40 head and a strong back and a reason to work. That's a business. If 2 grown people can keep their pride in their pockets long enough to shake on it." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. The memory of where one used to go. "Folks'll talk," he said. "Folks are already talking. They're saying I got bought." She set the cup down hard. "I would rather they say I went into business with the meanest, quietest, most stiff-necked rancher in Steiner Flat than say I got bought. At least the first one's got some dignity in it." And there, the mouth finally went. Just a little. Just enough. Meanest, he said, and quietest. You forgot land proud. I didn't forget it. I was being kind. He looked at her across that lamp for a long moment. Two people who had spent their whole lives making sure they never owed anybody a thing. And he put out his hand. 1 calf in 3's yours, he said. The grass is mine, and the water. We split the labor down the middle, and if you ever tell a living soul I bargained soft with a woman, I'll deny it to the grave. She took his hand. It was dry and hard, and it shook once, firm, and let go. Partners, she said. She didn't know yet what that word would cost her. Or what it would save. They drove her 40 head across the draw 3 days later, in the cold, clean light of a hill country morning. It was harder work than either of them let on. A cow does not care whose name is on the paper. One old heifer went down in the soft ground at the bottom of the draw, bogged to the belly, bawling like the end of the world. Gideon went in after her with a rope and got mud to his hips. Della came in from the other side, and she didn't wait to be told, and she didn't stand on the bank being a lady. She got her shoulder under that cow's hindquarters and set her feet in the muck and pushed while he hauled. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. It was the same silence as a hard bed, 2 people bent to one job, breathing together, nothing extra. The heifer came out with a sound like a boot from a bucket and stood shivering and disgusted on solid ground. Della and Gideon stood in the draw, mud to the waist, both of them soaked, and looked at each other. You'll do, he said. From a man like that, it was a sonnet. That night, riding home from checking the herd, she came over the rise and stopped the mare cold. There, on the far gatepost of the Vance Range, where the trail turned down toward her own place, a lantern was burning. Nobody was near it. He'd hung it there and gone in. She sat the mare and looked at that small gold light a long time. She had ridden that dark trail 6 mornings a year for 9 years and never once had a light to steer by. Now there was one. He never mentioned it. She never thanked him. But it burned every night after, and every night she found her way home by it. That was the first degree. The winter did its work on them, the way winter does. There came a night in the black cold before spring when Gideon's own boy, a hired boy, 12, on a mule, the same age as the boy who'd come for her once, pounded on her door at 3 in the morning. Not a birth this time. A heifer down with a bad calf, twisted wrong, and Gideon's hands too big and too proud to do the fine work. She came. Of course she came. She rolled her sleeves in a freezing shed by the light of a single lamp, and she reached in with the same hands that had brought 82 children into the county, and she found the trouble and turned it and eased that calf into the world slick and steaming, while Gideon held the lamp and held his breath. The calf lived. The heifer lived. Gideon looked at her hands in the lamplight, red to the elbow, sure as a surgeon's. Same hands, he said, wondering, cow or child. A birth is a birth, she said. The mother does the work. I just don't let her do it alone. He didn't answer that. But when she looked up, there was a cup of coffee waiting on the rail, hot, black. He'd had it ready before she asked. He'd been keeping it hot against the cold for her, the whole time, and saying nothing. That was the 2nd degree, and the 3rd. They kept the tally book in 2 hands after that, her column and his, side by side in the same worn book, his cramped block letters, her quick slanting hand. Head counted, calves marked, the shares reckoned honest down to the last hoof. She'd never seen her own work written in a ledger next to a man's as an equal. She caught herself looking at it sometimes by lamplight. 2 columns, 2 names. Nobody owning anybody. And the county talked. It came to a head at the stockmen's gathering at Hersberg that spring, where the cattlemen met to talk beef and rain. Colonel Harlan Boyd was there, watch chain across his belly. The man who held half the county's paper and never let a soul forget it. Somebody mentioned the Hartwell brand running on Vance grass. Boyd laughed. He laughed so the whole room could hear it. A granny woman playing at cattle, he said. Next we'll have the barber shoeing horses and the preacher running the bank. He tucked his thumbs in his vest. Bought by one man for a night's work, and now she's thrown in with a broke one. That grass'll be mine by fall, and everything standing on it besides. It got back to Della the way such things do. It stung. She was surprised how much it stung, but she said nothing. And she rode home that night by the lantern on the gatepost, and she told herself a woman who works honest doesn't answer talk. She answers with cattle. She did not yet know what Boyd meant by everything standing on it besides. It was Marta Krauss who gave her the key. Marta was up from her bed at last, thin and pale, and holding both her twins, when Della came by to check the babies in the soft end of spring. They sat on the porch, and Marta, watching Della's face, said the thing she had been carrying since January. "You never asked why Emil signed those cattle." "I figured he was grateful." "He was. But that's not why." Marta shifted the babies. "You knew Granny Ottilie. I did. She trained me. Best pair of hands this county ever saw." Della smiled at the memory. 200 babies she caught, and they buried her in a borrowed dress, because she died owning nothing but her satchel. "That was my mother," Marta said. Della went still. "Ottilie Reinhardt was my mother," Marta said quietly. "The last granny woman before you. She caught 200 babies in this county. She saved half the mothers on this creek, and she died with nothing, and there wasn't a black dress in the family fit to bury her, so the church loaned one." Marta's voice did not shake. It was too old a grief to shake. "I lay in that bed 2 days, sure I was going to die the way women die, and I thought, the woman saving me is going to end up just like my mother. Nothing to her name. A borrowed dress." The twins made their small sounds. Down in the draw, a cow called. "So I told Emil," Marta said. "From that bed, before I even knew if I'd live. I said, if she brings us through, you will not pay her in eggs. You will not pay her in thanks. You will put something in her name that no man can ever take back, because I will not stand at another granny woman's grave and watch them lower her in a dress that isn't hers." She looked Della full in the face. "He didn't sign those cattle to thank you. He signed them because I would not let this county bury one more of us poor." Della sat on that porch a long time and did not trust herself to speak. Everything she had thought was gratitude turned over in her hands and showed its other face. It had never been a purchase. It had been a woman in a childbed, refusing to bury her own mother twice. The paper in her satchel stopped being armor against charity. It became something she was standing in for. Every granny woman before her, buried in borrowed clothes. She rode home that evening feeling 10 feet tall and terrified all at once. And the lantern was burning on the gatepost, and she thought, for the first time in 9 years, that maybe being counted and being owned were not the only 2 roads a woman could walk. Then the bank sent its letter, and the ground opened. It came to Gideon, not to her, but she was there when he read it, and she watched a proud man turn to stone at his own table. He put it down. He picked it up. He put it down again. "What is it?" she said. He didn't answer. "Gideon, we keep 1 book now." "What is it?" "It's a note," he said. "Low, $1,400. Boyd's bank." He wouldn't look at her. "I took it 3 years back. A bad winter. Half the herd froze. I told myself I'd have it clear before it came due. I never told a soul. It's mine to carry. When's it due?" 60 days. The room was very quiet. "He's calling it," Gideon said. "Boyd. He knows I can't raise 1,400 by fall. He never wanted the money. He wanted the grass." Now he did look at her, and it was the worst thing she'd ever seen on his face. "Your 40 head are standing on grass the bank is about to sweep. Della, when he takes this range, he takes everything grazing on it, including yours." She started to speak. He cut her off, and his voice was iron. "Move your stock off." Tonight, tomorrow, before it's tangled up in this. He stood. I'll not have it said the granny woman went down because she threw in with a man too proud to say he was drowning. You take your 40 head and you go back across that draw and you forget you ever shook my hand. Gideon, I mean it. His fists were on the table. I got myself into this. I'll go down alone. That's the one thing I've got left to do decent. Don't you take that from me too. And there it was. Pride as silence, the thing that would make a man lose his whole world rather than let one soul see him need a hand. He was trying to push her off a sinking boat and calling it kindness, and the fool didn't know it was the cruelest thing he could do. The talk in town caught the scent by the next week. Bought by one man, thrown in with a sinking one. Della heard it at the store and kept her back straight and her face still. Storm weather sat over the draw for 3 days, gray and low. She saddled the mare to go move her cattle off Vance grass, the way he'd told her. And then she stopped, halfway to the gate, and took the folded paper out of her satchel and read it one more time in the gray light. Read it the way the recorder had read it. Slow. Every word. 40 head. Held as the separate property of Della Hartwell, a married woman's separate estate under the law of the state of Texas. Filed, dated, marked with her own brand. Recorded at Hersberg on a day 2 full months before any note came due. She stood in the wet wind and felt the whole thing turn over in her hands for the second time that spring. The armor she'd built against gossip. The paper she'd filed so no man could say she was bought. Separate property. Recorded and branded before the note was called. Boyd could sweep the Vance range. He could take Gideon's grass and Gideon's water and Gideon's pride. He could not touch her 40 head, not one hoof of it. It was hers, on the county's own ledger, filed clean and clear before his note ever came due. A woman's separate property, standing on rented grass, was not the borrower's to lose. And 1 calf in 3, sold at Hersberg in the fall, she did the sum standing there in the wind, and did it again. And her heart came up in her throat. It was enough. Not much over. But enough. Enough to carry a $1,400 note. The thing she'd built out of fear was the exact thing that could save the man who'd hung a lantern on a gatepost so a widow could find her way home in the dark. She turned the mare around. She did not go move her cattle. She rode for Hersberg. The county was on the courthouse steps the day Boyd came to call the note. He'd made sure of that. He liked an audience for a hanging. Half of Steiner Flat found a reason to be in town. The storemen. The stockmen who'd laughed. Emil Krauss with his hat in his hand, and Marta beside him thin and fierce. Gideon stood at the bottom of the steps, gray-faced, come to take his medicine standing up like a man. Boyd climbed the steps with his lawyer and his watch chain and laid his paper on the recorder's desk. $1,400, he said, loud, for the crowd, due and unpaid. I'm calling the note on the Vance range and everything grazing it. The law's the law, gentlemen. A man who can't pay doesn't keep. He looked down at Gideon and smiled. Nothing personal, Vance, just business. The recorder reached for his pen, and Della Hartwell came up those steps with mud on her boots and her satchel on her arm, and she laid her own paper on the desk beside Boyd's. Before you sign anything, she said, read that one first. Boyd looked at her the way a man looks at a fly. Granny woman, this is no place. Read it, she told the recorder. Out loud, so the county that's been talking can hear it plain. The recorder picked it up. He was an honest man, and he knew his own hand. He read it out, slow and clear, over the whole silent crowd. 40 head of breeding stock. The separate property of Della Hartwell. Run on shares, 1 calf in 3. Filed and recorded and branded at Hersberg. Dated, and here his voice slowed, 2 months and more before the Vance note was ever called. The steps went very quiet. That grass may be Vance's, Della said, and her voice carried clean to the back of the crowd. "You want to take it, Colonel, that's between you and him and the bank. But 40 head of that stock is mine. Mine, separate, filed under Texas law before your note came due. You can sweep every hoof that belongs to Gideon Vance. You cannot touch one that belongs to me. It's not the borrower's to lose. It never was." Boyd's face began to change. He snatched the paper up. He read it himself. His lawyer read it over his shoulder and went a shade paler. "And here's the rest," Della said, before he found his tongue. "1 calf in 3, mine to sell, sold at this very town come fall, comes to enough to carry that note entire. Every dollar of the 1,400. I'm paying it, Colonel. Today I'll sign to pay it out of my share. And the Vance range stays exactly where it stood since before you had a bank." She let that land. "You don't get the grass. You don't get my cattle. You get your money, which is all you were ever owed, and not one blade more." The colonel stood on the courthouse steps with his own instrument in his hand, the paper, the law, the very thing he'd trusted to crush a proud man, and it had turned in his grip and cut him. "This is a trick," he said, but the bluster had gone out of it. "It's a filing," said the recorder mildly. "My filing." "It's good." "It's better than good, Colonel. It's ironclad." Della stepped up close to Boyd then, close enough that the front row could hear it, and she said the thing the whole long year had been building to. "They paid me in eggs for 9 years, Colonel Boyd. Emil Krauss tried to pay me in cattle, and I made him pay me in partnership instead, because partnership is on paper." She tapped the desk. "It's filed. It's dated. It's the law. And that's the one place, Colonel, a man like you can't reach." Boyd looked around the steps, at the storemen who'd laughed with him, at the stockmen, and not one of them would meet his eye, because there is nothing a hill country crowd loves less than a big man made small by a paper he can't argue with. He put his watch chain away. He picked up his $1,400, which the recorder was already drawing up to be paid, and he walked down those steps and through the crowd. And the crowd opened for him, and closed behind him, and said not one word. He had wanted the grass, and a county with no woman on its stock rolls. He walked off with his money and his arrogance in pieces, and neither one bought him a thing. The storemen who'd said she was playing at cattle found their boots very interesting. One of them took his hat off, which is as close to an apology as such men come. Emil Krauss stood in the crowd with tears on his face and didn't wipe them. Marta had both her twins on her hip, and she looked at Della the way you look at a thing you swore into being from a sickbed. And she nodded once. Slow, and it was worth more than the whole 40 head. And Gideon Vance stood at the bottom of the steps and watched the woman he tried to send away across the draw save his land with a piece of paper he never knew she held. He'd meant to go down alone and call it dignity. She'd made a partnership out of her own fear, and the partnership held. They walked out to the edge of the draw that evening, the two of them, as the sun went down. The same draw where a bogged heifer had once made them equals in the mud. The lantern was on the far gatepost, burning up gold, and for the first time in 9 years, Gideon Vance crossed the draw to her side, instead of nodding at her from his own. He had his hat in his hand. A land-proud man, hat in hand, is a kind of prayer. "Note's clear," he said. "Your share carried it. The grass is safe." He turned the hat in his hands. "I tried to send you off to save you. You saved the whole thing instead. I'm not built to say this kind of thing, Della. I know you're not. So I'll say the other thing." He looked up. "Run your herd on my grass for good. Not 60 days, not 1 season. For good. And put your name on that gate beside mine. Where it belongs." The woman who had read every kindness her whole life as a purchase, as a debt, as a rope, waiting to tie her down, that woman looked at a lantern burning on a gatepost, and at a proud man with his hat in his hands, and she found she was not afraid. "Partners," she said. And then, softer. Because that word had done its work, and there was room now for the other one, and, yes, he reached out and took her hand, the way he had that first night over the lamp, dry and hard and shaking once. But this time, neither of them let go. They stood at the edge of the draw with the lantern burning between the two gateposts and the whole county behind them, and the last of the light went down easy over good grass that no man could sweep. 2 years on, the brands run together on that range. The Vance mark and the Hartwell mark, side by side, the way they run in the tally book, the way her name runs on the gate. There is a lit house at the end of the trail now, and a table set for supper, and a girl of 9 that Della took in, an orphan off a hard birth she couldn't save the mother of, learning to keep the 2 columns of the tally book in her own careful hand. And the lantern doesn't hang on the far gatepost anymore. There's nothing to signal across. No draw between them to find her way over in the dark. It hangs on their own front porch now, on the house they share, and it burns for anyone still out on the road. There came a boy on a lathered mule to that door. Late, the way there always does. A hard birth 2 draws over, the doctor 40 miles off, same as it ever was. Della took up her satchel and her willow basket and her length of good boiled cord, and she went, and she brought them through, mother and child both breathing by morning. And the grateful family did what grateful families do. They pressed a basket of eggs into her hands at the door. Della set the willow basket down on their table. Empty, and she took out a folded paper instead, the same worn kind she carried now for exactly this, and she laid it flat where the lamp could reach it. "Don't pay me in eggs," she said gently. "I've been paid in eggs. 9 years of it, and it was honest. And it fed me. But I'll tell you what a granny woman is worth, and it isn't a basket at the door." She tapped the paper. "You go to Herzberg. You put something in that girl's name, a calf, an acre, one thing that's hers and no man's to take. Because buried in a borrowed dress is no way to thank a woman who catches your children. There's been enough of us gone into the ground with nothing. I'll not have another." She picked up the willow basket, still empty, and she rode home by her own porch light. Worth that goes uncounted isn't gratitude. It's a debt. And a woman counts hers as a partner, on paper, in her own name, or she does not count it at all. That's the whole of it. A midwife paid in eggs for 9 years, who turned a gift she was afraid of into a partnership no man could reach, and found. At 51, that love was only ever 2 pairs of hands bent to one hard job in the dark. If you've got a story like that in your own family, a woman who was never once counted the way she should have been, comment the town you're watching from. I want to see just how far a story about a woman paid in eggs can travel.